it is my honor to introduce Alexandra Midal, an author we have been greedily following, a kind of unaware accomplice, since we share so many affinities between the value and potentiality of the relation between design and fiction, and also with film. Which in our case has been a kind of an adventure, continuous discovery that is being implemented in our syllabus since 2018, especially in the bachelor. And I recall that most of the audience is from it's our bachelor students. She has been a recurrent, Alexandra Midal has been a recurrent resource in our academic endeavors. And this moment is, by all these reasons, a moment of rejoice, a moment that we've been waiting for somehow. I will just switch briefly to Portuguese to read the abstract of Alexandra Midal presentation in Portuguese, que tem título completamente assertivo, bastante afirmativo também. O design é ficção. E vou passar a ler a sinopse da Alexandra. Talvez aqui e ali já se tenha visto uma criatura camp dividida entre o silêncio da pessoa incapaz de se expressar e a conversa de circunstância de uma marioneta produtiva. É o boneco do ventríloco. Além da óbvia metáfora clássica, Alexandra Midal defende que o discurso ficcional veiculado pelo design, sejam objetos, mobiliário, dummies ou MacGuffins, é essencial. Defende-se em concreto que a ficção dá voz aos críticos do design, sobretudo por ser um chamariz necessário e opaco. O design não se limita a falar, está interligado com a ficção, torna-se um instrumento crítico válido e poderoso que, sob um disfarce, transmite questões políticas. So, without further delay, Alexandra Midal, please, the stage is yours. You are unmuted. Just make.
Yes, sorry. I just want to say to everyone first that my English is a Franglish, so it might be easy to understand. So good late afternoon, everyone, and hola to all the people connected. And it's really a great honor for me and a pleasure to be part of today's talk. I would like to thank for having me in this joint project between the Facultad de las Bellas Artes, I'm not pronouncing it well, I'm so sorry, of Lisboa and the MAAT. And I would like to especially thank Sofia Gonçalves, Luisa Ribas, and Nuno Carvalho for setting this talk up in this time of turmoil where probably you're all aware, thinking and sharing ideas is more important than ever. So I think we're going to launch the video. Enjoy, and we will have a Q&A just after to discuss these kind of thoughts and observations on fiction and design that I kind of sum up for you to eat up our engine of imagination and speculation in a tiny, tiny format for me, because I love to talk for long. So it's going to be 34 minutes sharp before the Q&A session. Enjoy.
On the highway from Los Angeles to Palm Springs, you can see two dinosaurs. They were designed and built up by an ex-Disney prop artist named Claude Bell in the 1970s. They are called Mr. Rex and Dinny, and they were designed to attract tourists and children to stop, eat, and relax at his diner. Inside Mr. Rex, where you can step up, Bell realized a series of drawings of the evolution. Features in classics such as Pee-wee Herman's Big Adventure or Ha-Ha Sweet and Ben music video, these dinosaurs are what I call a pre-post-truth. Today, you can still see Mr. Rex and Dinny on your left when driving to Coachella. But after Bell's death in the 1980s and today, where it has just been bought for large entertainment, the two prehistoric creatures have become a Trojan horse, or to be more specific, a Trojan dinosaurs, as Emma Pfleger, the young designer, put it in a master essay at Head Geneva, a Trojan dinosaurs in the service of a creationist strategy. Who doesn't like dinosaurs? Every single kid is crazy about these creatures, and it is maybe why, when bought by creationists, the two dinosaurs, even though it makes no sense with their belief, they remain the same, untouched, on the highway, and they became a sign for a creationist bliss world. Creationism is taught in many US states in parallel with the theory of evolution. According to creationism, the dinosaurs are said to have lived with Adam and Eve, and even to have been embarked on Noah's Ark, as they were, in reality for them, as tiny as sheep. Here you can see an example for kids in a US school. And here you can see a series of photos of the Ark's encounter. 4 years ago, in 2016, creationists have opened a Christian theme park with a 152-meter-long Noah's Ark in Kentucky. It was designed to accommodate 10,000 visitors a day. And believe it or not, the state of Kentucky has experienced severe flooding coinciding with the opening of the attraction. So if I decided to start my talk today with this example, it's because we've come in an era of storytelling, and it is a potent as well as dangerous tool that you better learn to master. Design is, and has always have, in relation with fiction. Sometimes it has become a goal, and sometimes it is a strategic Trojan horse that helps to convey ideas. To start, let's relate for education and entertainment that was addressed to famous Phineas Taylor Barnum. He was said to be the emperor of artifice and the first showman in the world. Indeed, he certainly knew how to pitch a story. In his autobiography, he shares a childhood memory and he claims that it changed the course of his life. In minute detail, he recounts how his grandfather was making a point of introducing him as the heir to a vast and prosperous estate. Apart from the little boy, everybody knew, of course, that the stately domain was no more curious, yet confident. The young Barnum set out to inspect his property, and he realized that he had been the laughingstock of the village for all these years. The life-altering status Barnum places on what was essentially a harmless family prank reveals how taken he was by the power of a good story, and how it would prefigure a career spent elevating confabulation to an art form. The owner of the American Museum of Countless Unique Curiosities, the self-proclaimed Prince of Hamburgs, Barnum had an equal talent for crafting the most far-fetched stories, which the audience, according to his account, was inclined to believe with the greatest pleasure. Armed with up to 850,000 exhibits, his five-story building on Broadway thrived on monsters and marvels, Siamese brothers, a horse with woolly hair, just to name a few, and especially the 160-year-old slave, supposedly the nanny of George Washington. Let's not forget the authentic Fiji mermaid, as he spelled it. He was embroidering with hair-raising tales so well that facing these half fish, half monkey, dry and mummified, wouldn't bother the audience that would go on paying to see this so-called wonder. You can see that not only a collector, Barnum was equally versed in the art of storytelling. Soon after the printing of Charles Darwin's The Origin of Species in 1860, Barnum decided to debate this very question within the Museum of Wonders that he owned, and Barnum's idea was to show to his fellow Americans the missing link between animals and human beings. Here is an example with What Is It? the name that Barnum gave to William Henry Johnson, who he claims was the missing link between apes and human beings. Johnson was born in New Jersey. He was suffering from nanism and microcephalia, and he soon became the subject of evolutionist debate. What is it? Was presented as the link, and in the ads, Barnum would always insist on presenting him as a salvage creature who hardly could stand up. Therefore, he was given a stick. Sometimes also, Johnson would pose in front of the camera with a costume made of hairy fur, as the one that you can see here. Barnum would pay him $1 a day, but as the audience was mesmerized by him, soon he would negotiate a rise, eventually, and even if these exhibitions were more than shocking and unbearable, it is said that Barnum and Johnson became friends. Johnson was very popular and went on exhibiting himself until his death in the 1920s. No need to say that this success was linked to the extreme racism of the audience and that Barnum took a financial advantage on the situation. In this sense, Barnum belongs to the family of storytellers and masters of deceit who place artifice at the service of imagination. He creates a spectacle out of stories in which truth and fiction are rendered indistinguishable and in which designers sometimes take part. You've probably seen, here or there, a camp creature torn between the silence of the individual who cannot express him or herself and the chit-chat of the prolific marionette. Ventriloquism is the art of seeming to speak where one is not. Barnum exhibited plenty of them, but it remains who really speak and what is the story. But as a MacGuffin, it doesn't really matter as such. So let's see the first part, fictions, the design history. Exploring this horizon cannot be done without coming back to the fictional dimension of the history of design as measured by the yardstick of its original writing. Taken together, Nicholas Pevsner's Pioneers of the Modern Movement and Siegfried Giedion's Mechanization Text Command are considered as the founding text of the history of design, but both aspire towards an objective approach and offer a schema of references point from which it is possible to analyze design from its very beginnings. Yet, rather than offering a history of design tout court, these two works, these two books, provide a history from the sole perspective of modern architecture, and not from design per se. It is unusual to be able to refer with certainty to the founding text of a discipline. An examination of the intentions behind these two works raises serious questions around the very existence of design discipline. Both texts were produced by authors considered to be major critics of the modern movement in architecture, for whom design was far from a primary or even secondary concern. The title of my last book, Design by Accident for a New History of Design, references this ambiguity at the origin of the unintentional project that is design. The notion of the accident holds the history of design as an incursion into a narrative of architecture and industrialization. The forming of design is partly based on narrative structure and on a way of telling stories based on a mode of tensions likely to catch the reader's attention. The emergence of design cannot be approached without taking into account its impact in these specific narrative, or, if I may say, in this fiction. Examined, the line adopted by each of these two authors revealed that they build up a fiction. This discovery raises a series of questions about the complexity of manufacturing history. What's more, it is certainly surprising that such an hegemonic perspective was so persistent in the field of design, given that neither of these two scholars' construct was devised to formulate a possible history of design. The turn with fiction that we are going to study today interrupts this linear course of that modernist history, and thus it creates a gap for a kind of design which would thus sidestep the normative nature of the functionalist values advocated right up to the present day. Historically, though, designers have appropriated fiction along with its modes of diffusion, so as to express political and social criticism dimly disguised. Designer William Morris' seminal book News from Nowhere from 1890 was published by his own publishing house, Kelmscott Press, and it set the standard for fiction as a means to model disturbing reality within the world of design. Morris is at the crossroads of powerful suggestions which favor dreams and which is novel is the summit. He borrows from the space-time displacements belonging to Uchronia to attack the recent primacy of industrial values and of modern civilization, which had found its place in England, the cradle of the Industrial Revolution. His character, William Guest, got up in the morning after an apparently normal night. As soon as he leaves the house threshold, he is intrigued by subtle changes, and then he's discovering a society regenerated by the pairing of everything in art and life. With Morris, the coupling of design and fiction takes as much their shared visionary ambition as their need to combine fiction with a romantic reality through the invention of domesticity. You can find a close mechanism of contestation with the strategy employed by the members of the radical architecture in Italy, in Florence especially, at the turn of the 1960s. Its members defended the idea of the critical power of fiction. We have no time to go into detail, just that you know that they wanted to transform the traditional definitions of utopia and intertwine it with the reality, their utopia of the real, as they say. It consists in diverting the ideologies advocated by modernity by pushing them to their own contradictions. These critical forms took quite often the form of a fiction and describe a so-called imaginary situation which they intend to criticize and, if possible better, to dismantle functionalism. Conceived by pursuing a fictional strategy, 12 Ideal Cities, or 12 Cautionary Christmas Tales, premonition of a mystic rebirth of urbanism, was devised by Gian Piero Frassinelli, member of Superstudio, the group of radical Italian architects founded in Florence in 1966. These 12 Cautionary Christmas Tales propose 12 apocalyptic urban scenarios published in the form of a test in architecture and decoration magazines from 1971 onwards. Accompanied by drawing and photomontage, as can be seen in this slideshow that was screened for the first time at the Gallery Mana in Rome in 1972 and was set up as a little film at the Storefront for Art and Architecture in New York a couple of years ago, this negative and scathing utopia represents, in a fictional court, a critical analysis of norms of urban development and architectural modernism pushed to their extreme. The enemy group of radical architecture, Archisum Associati, is also very important in that respect. What they say is that the role of fiction is like a beneficial poison. So let's look very carefully to one of the quotes from Archisum Associati, that is associate discussing this idea and this concept of the Trojan horse strategy. What do they say? Here it is. The problem for us is how to serve up an ice cream in such a way that he, the customer, loses the desire to eat it for the rest of his life. Or an ice cream that, once it has been bought, grows bigger than him and humiliates him, or that becomes a piece of the world surrounding him and frightens him. In short, an ice cream with no alternatives. Either you eat it or it eats you. Or rather, it starts to eat you as soon as you've finished it. And then we think apple bombs, poisonous sweets, false information. In short, Trojan blanket, beds, or horses that are brought into the house and destroy everything in it. We want to let in everything that stays outside the door. Careful constructed banality, deliberate vulgarity, urban fittings, dogs that bite. It says it all. Now, with fiction, They try to get rid of the grip of capitalism by producing nothing tangible except proposal text projects. That is why, also at the time, the radical architecture was so close to conceptual art. They postulate that it is possible to escape the market constraints, even if their proposals are most often confined to the experimental territory of the institution, which is a quite potent critic. Fiction has given voice to the critics of society. It has established itself as a designer provocative language. But today, what's the role of fiction in design? What does it trigger? Why fiction? Under the pen of philosopher Wilhelm Flusser, design goes further than the semantic ambivalence of planning and drawing, which is etymologically linked to every attempt of a conventional definition of design, and it moves towards an approach which is maliciously Machiavellian, the trap. He says a design formed against nature and adds, the word design is presented in a context where a part is linked to ruse and treachery. A designer is a deceitful plotter who sets trap. In the same context, one comes across other very significant words, notably and especially the words mechanical and machine. Reflecting on the etymology of the word design, Flusser goes even further. He points out that it, I quote, occur in contexts associated with cunning and deceit. Consequently, a machine is a device designed to deceive. A lever, for example, cheats gravity, and mechanics is the trick of fooling heavy bodies, end of quote. One might be tempted to think that the technology and media philosopher Flusser and the design have little in common, but one hardly fails to notice a shared tendency to consider design as the self-reflexive art of deceit and gambling. It comes close to the definition proposed by him who underlies this etymological relation of artifice and design. He says again, the Latin equivalent of the Greek techne is ars, which in fact suggests a metaphor similar to the English rogue's sleight of hand. The diminutive of ars is articulum, i.e. little art, and indicates that something is turned around the end, as in the French tour de main. Ins, ars, means something like agility or the ability to turn something to one's advantage, and artiflex, i.e. artist, means a trickster, above all. It's hardly a coincidence then that the notion of artifice is omnipresent in fiction, don't you think? Because they are instrumental to the debate on the definition and redefinition and reconfigurations of design in all its intermediate formulations. And such overlaps overtake the question of media and serve both the theory and the practice of design. If the work of fiction has otherwise occupied a specific place within the field of design, after so many years, that it's because one of its prerequisites is to make allowances for implicit speculation of the what-if scenario. Fictions, like design as a subject, are the result of a construction which sets out to engage in dialogue with a fictitious world. And sometimes, in return, it creates a new world, as would do Jan and Rabi with the fantastic project named Foragers from 2010. Speculating about a given world always implies an abstract construction, even if it is from scratch. This position is akin to what of world making, to use the title of a book by art historian Nelson Goodman, in which he stated that there is no such thing as a given world, but only worlds which are built, including those we may have taken to be considered as reality. He writes, world making as we know it always starts from worlds already on hand. The making is a remaking. Likewise, designers who work with fiction go about making and remaking worlds again and again as they wonder if our universe is a stimulation or not. And they are living, or they are proposing at least, different, parallel, very different lives. Assuming the opaque clearness of reality in permanent fiction, design gives shape to his mental construction and to these possible or plausible universes. Diegetic, the marriage of design and fiction induces stages, a temporary continuum, and a motion which makes it possible to seize a possibility unwilling to limit design to a sole destiny. Once the opaque clearness of reality is assumed, design and speculation become a permanent fiction that demands result from an agreement. Everyone needs to willingly agree to believe in it, to yield to the famous concept of suspension of disbelief defined by Coleridge. You need to agree on a narrative pact. When addressing this question in reference to fictional designer film, a production that is less conspicuous than those which regroup didactic or explanatory productions, such as documentaries on design, designers draw largely on strategy that stem from fiction. With fiction, design has proven itself capable of acting tactically from within, to move into the strongholds of functionalism, liberalism, industry, or consumerism, even if only on occasions. Be that as it may, never has fiction been so openly acknowledged by designers as it is nowadays. But it's rare that these productions take hold of the language of fiction. They have preferred forms of abstraction closer to experimental cinema, yearning likewise to dodge the risk of narrative and discourse, as if resorting to a fictionalization of reality were to amount to betraying it. Contrarily, fiction films directed by designers are a more recent act. They associate storytelling to objects or products and cinema, all of them within a practice of design that is rethought. Maybe because fiction is the Trojan horse and design is the discipline of the artificial, then we can enter in the beauty of the lies of fiction. But we never go away from tactic and strategy. Design is said to be diabolic and criminal because it is, or it would be, subordinated to materialism, associated to liberalism, and enslaved to capitalism. Just remember Marinetti's devastating criticism in the 1909-1910, or more recently Claude Parent's criticism in 1971, even Archisum Associati, or more recently the critiques by Al Foster around 2008, and we could go on. This original scene attached to design is amplified by the conjuring and tricks that were claimed by first fiction film directors of history, Georges Méliès, in 1907, or at least before the rewriting of film history and the reintegration of female figures, such as Alice Guy, among others, who was, before Georges Méliès, a film director of fiction. And all that bonds back with the trickery of nature that defined design, according to Wilhelm Flusser. More recently, claims about design fiction by Julian Blicker and Alex Coles, etc., have renewed the analysis of strategy to a speculative design which is ambivalent towards what is concrete and what is fictional. Furthermore, value fiction has allowed the possibility of announcing social and cultural values which are ambiguous and which associate fiction and technology. Just have a look to the work of Julian Raby. Nowadays, countless designers are directing fictional films where Noam Turan takes center stage. In the vein of dismantling the conformism of functionality attached to design, Turan directed, among other works, Desire Management in 2006. It is 5 short films whose protagonists are 5 hypothetical objects. By means of short sketches, both intriguing and droll, the objects take place as if being used. In his analysis of Turan's work, the critique goes back over the political dimension of 2 films by Turan: his graduate project, Objects for Lonely Men from 2001, and Desire Management. By creating, I quote, a physical and psychological space for thinking about the individual position which everyone has in society in general, and perhaps we can even reckon that is involved in their last refuge. End of quote. According to Hack, it is perhaps even the last remaining refuge we can have today. Turan activates what I call a second generation of MacGuffin. Second generation because not only they activate a narrative, the result of which eludes viewer, but also because they question the history of design, its territory, and its contemporary limits by subtly shifting its emphasis from functionality to fictionality. Additionally, with the MacGuffin Library, a project of text and sculpture, it co-realized with Anka Kular, design incorporates fiction into a process of industrial fabrication. By using a rapid prototyping machine to generate the sculptures, the MacGuffin Library redirects a process that ordinarily think industrial products, and instead they mix the history of cinema and fiction within the industrial production of design. A MacGuffin is a term that Alfred Hitchcock, the film director, coined to guarantee the narrative plot of his films, as the matches in Stranger on a Train, the attaché case in Marnie, or the envelope in Psycho. For this lecture today, the dummy will be my MacGuffin. It is central to tell a story. Turan's and Kular's MacGuffin library involved the creation of intricate narratives developed as a means to disrupt hegemonic historiographies. Drawing from marginalized or neglected histories, they reflect upon the interrelations of memory, erasure, mythology, identity, and the essential force of storytelling as embodied as an archive. The work is materialized through dramatizations that take the form of an installation and also of an educational model. But fiction cannot avoid its own social and historical context. Therefore, while celebrating the way in which objects are intrinsically endowed with a narrative force, Turan shows that design brings about a drift, almost in the sense that Debord gave it, engaging in useless and gratuitous convolutions, aiming at whatever is uncommon, anomalous, sometimes even fetishistic. Design embeds artifice and deceit in films. The modernist medium of space, time, and illusion by excellence. By encouraging us to reconsider the relations between discourses and form, design reiterates the meaning of giving form to something, which is etymologically related to fiction. Finally, film deconstructs the conventional definition of design, merging it with narratives as well as technology. Along with this displacement from function to fiction, designers appropriate a language which, contrary to the general understanding, is not totally alien to them. The very etymology of the word fiction is anchored in this notion of giving shape, which associate formalization and formulation since the origin of the design discipline. Forms, fiction, hypothesis, speculation, and imagination mingle at the service of a project, of a critical poetic, if I may say, which distances itself from fact and scientific input or data and any other ways of accounting for the world. On the surface, the notions of artifice and storytelling seem unrelated to design, but they are quite possibly accomplices enabling us to rethink it. Allow me, therefore, to once more time, to go back to Wilhelm Flusser, who explained that, I quote, "The new form of culture, which design was to make possible, would be a culture that was aware of the fact that it was deceptive. So the question is, who and what are we deceiving when we become involved with culture, with art, with technology, in short, with design?" End of quote. And yet, because it is necessary and an opaque lure, fiction, as well as design, can play the role of a dummy for designers, and vice versa. Of course, in doing so, with the figure of the ventriloquist, design formulates a kind of an antidote to the modern and dominant idea that our culture, that the Western culture has gone from a culture of a hearing to a visual culture. But above all, it argues that there is a persistence of the voice, the unique voice that has to be taken in a metaphorical meaning, the voice of design, the voice of the designer. The same way that the voice is a construction and that its early recording stages escape a mechanical, scientific, medical, or technical history, design results from a vast and complex history where reality and fiction merge all the time. The importance of the narratives plays as much with the ephemerality of the voice of the ventriloquist as with the desire of impermanence linked to the recording of this voice. And it's a way to go across space and time and maybe to bring us back to the world of the living. This is why I will leave the final words of my very short presentation today to a kind of clumsy translation of an excerpt from a short novel by French writer Serge Brusselot, who didn't happen to be translated in English, entitled As heavy as the wind, or something like that, in French, Aussi lourd que le vent, a short novel in which he described the work of sculptors that are living in a colony installed in front of the seaside. And they discover that when they use words and language, when they expel it to the wind, it creates a work that is suspended in the air for a short time. This ephemeral aspect of the forms that are taken by ideas and by the language and the voices is a way for them, they think, to protect their art from any kind of commercial capitalism and speculation. Their sculptures would remain, therefore, in the realm of art, and no company could ever use it in order to speculate and make money. The fragility of the work has become, therefore, its best way of defending itself, and the ephemerality, the shortness of this life, of this sculpture that are just as long as the voice can exist, is the best guarantee that they can defeat the time and the end of the time.
Abracadabra, I sit on his knee. Presto, changeo, and now he is me. Hocus pocus, we take her to bed. Magic is fun. We're dead.
Josephine Levine presents Magic, a terrifying love story starring Anthony Hopkins, Anne Margaret, and Burgess Meredith. Rated R.
As in this novel by Brusselot, we need the voices. We need the voices in order to materialize ideas. And the fiction is a very strategic way of dealing with it. So my very prompt detour around films at the end of this presentation that I wish I could have more time to expand, but we're missing time, unfortunately, in this context, is a way to show how fiction does not portray the limits and overlaps of a new definition for design, but rather it is a proposal for, I would even say, a manifesto, or at least an invitation to explore an undecided ambiguity where design commits itself to the creation of fictional words as a trigger to a general demoralization and anxiety that is our world today. Of course, it doesn't bring answers. It does not resolve anything, which is good news. Yet, it is a valuable refuge for thinking. And within the turmoil we are experiencing now, when culture is said to be so little essential, we might need it more than ever. Even ventriloquists and ventriloquist dummies can fight when they do not share the same idea and vision of the narrative. Thank you.
Thank you.
So thank you, Alexandra, once again for this wonderful presentation in a video mode. I don't want to spare any second of our Q&A, and I will go straight ahead to my first question, if you don't mind. I don't know if you want to breathe or drink something, but I will go straight ahead to the first question. And this first question points out to the relation of design with fiction by the means of design history, which was the first part of your presentation. So we can sense a kind of amnesia of design in regard to fiction. If we, for instance, based this affirmation in an evidence, the strong temporal hiatus between William Morris' proposal with his uchronic novel News from Nowhere in the 19th century, and the growing emergence and relevance of concepts such as design fiction, critical design, speculative design within certain design discourses and practices, mostly during our current century. So, the question, can we explain this amnesia as a counter effect caused by the strong credibility of the commonly accepted history of design, based, for instance, in Pevsner and Giedams and other authors, of course, and other modernist theories, which you, by the way, also have called somehow a fiction?
Wow, that's a big question. So I think it's really important to realize that it's an amnesia, it's an oblivion, it's also a deny, a psychoanalytic denial of the situation for many, many reasons. But I think it's really important to remember that this history has been written by Pevsner and Giedion. I say very quickly in the presentation that it's exactly the same thing that happened with the film history that has been written in the 1940s by men. And not only the design history has been written by men, but also it has been written by two modernist scholars who didn't care at all about what design was. Indeed, if you look carefully into the books, for instance, in Pevsner's Pioneers of the Modern Movement, it's absolutely not clear about what it means by design. What design means is completely unclear, and it's only in the reedition of the book later on that the term design will appear on the cover of the book. He's trying to struggle to defend the idea of modernist movement. I'm not accusing him. I'm not in a Manichaean system. I just want to show how people think. And I want to say that they have set strategy and narrative that are creating this very strong oblivion about what is at stake. So the history of design is really a kind of a puppet history. And we've been taught, I've been taught as a student, and this is what I read most of the time, is that that was a kind of a marriage between functionality and design, between capitalism and design. And I wanted to know if it was true. And when you start digging, but very, very easily, you just start scratching. Then you realize that the story that has been told is like the story, it's like the fairy tales you have when you're a kid. It's not true. It doesn't mean that it's not interesting to see how it is constructed, because it can make you dream, but it's not true. The question again is not to be moral about that and to give the good points and the bad points, but it's just interesting to see that there is a kind of lure, a lies, not only in the fiction, but a lies in what is supposed to be the objectivity of the scholar. So I just want to insist on the idea of denial, because it's a concept I borrow from another scholar who was the first one to dismantle Pevsner theory, one of his students, because we know our students are going to dismantle our theory. That's the way it works. That's nice part of it. So it's Rainer Barnum, and Rainer Barnum was the first one to say that this denial within the design, within the architecture history about the emotional, to make it short, part of modernity and functionalism needed to be brought back to the central stage. Of course, he didn't talk about design. That was not the point. To be extremely precise and maybe finish with that question, is that the question of design as such for Pevsner, the first time that he really talked about it was when he was invited to give a lecture at Aspen, Colorado by Rainer Barnum for these Aspen lectures, which were so important for the design history. And at that time, Pevsner said that he just discovered what design was about, thanks to his students, Rainer Barnum. So Of course, now, as you said, we're dealing with design fiction. It's part of one of the movement that is quite important that lots of people have been talked about and written about. I think we are just at the beginning of the question of fiction. I think it's important for me to go back to the roots and the origins in order to set up a kind of a platform for us to be standing on something. I think it's always important to go back to history regarding what's going to be our future. So in that sense, I thought it was important today to present very quickly on these William Morris important struggle against the society, the capitalism, the burgeoning of pollution everywhere in the city of London, where the factories were in the center of the city, etc. And to show that this idea of the refuge of the fiction at one point became an instrumental, becoming instrumental. And the struggle just started there, because we can say that design is within a tradition of worries still today.
Yeah, I completely agree. This is more than an amnesia, a kind of a trauma, and probably we are starting to deal with it now.
Hopefully. They maybe need, you know, all those people, sorry, they might need like what you need when you are in a denial. You need like 10 years of psychoanalysis.
Let's build our psychoanalysis classes together. So the second question goes towards the limits of fiction. And I guess that some of the questions that our students are posing right now in the Q&A interface, they are somehow connecting with this question as well. So in the presentation, you quoted Nelson Goodman, who states that world making always starts from worlds already on end. So to a certain degree, and based on Goodman's words, fiction is always based on reality. Do you think there is a kind of a line, let's say a moral or ethical line or other kind of limits that fiction cannot cross to be meaningful as a what-if scenario?
I suppose this also has to do with the lecture before that I was unable to understand.
Well,
sorry.
Not directly, of course, because we are not going to trap you in that kind of situation.
No worry.
But of course, there are connections with it, for sure.
Okay, I think it's a very important question, but I think that the problem comes by the fact that most of the time we create a kind of a separation between objectivity and what would be fiction, of fact and fiction. And I think then we are trying to reach a reconciliation between the two, thinking that if we bring back a part of fiction as a tool, we kind of neutralize the bad things that can happen with fiction. But I don't know what you've been talking about before, but for sure, post-truth are not dealing with the fact that they think that they are kind of reporting fiction within the reality. It's not the way that it processes. So what I can say is that, yeah, there is a limit for the lies of fiction. It's a general, I would use the word ethics. I would go back to Greek instead of Latin. I think it's important to be careful, but then I will go back to what Coleridge said. There is a pact. There is a pact that you're doing, that you're okay to be thrilled by the shivering of what fiction is about. The very big difference between fake news and everything is that in that sense of the fiction I'm talking about, you are invited to be part of this fiction. You know where you are. You are never kidnapped to yourself. That is extremely important. But on the other hand, I would go back to another writer that I took off my presentation, but I wanted to talk about him before, sorry. It's Philip K. Dick, the sci-fi writer. And in 1977, at the end of his life, he gave a very important lecture in the city of Metz in France. People who invited him couldn't believe that such a big writer could come to Metz. But what he said, it has been published in many, many languages, translated. The title, as far as I remember, is If You Don't Like That Word, You Should See Some Others. And what he's claiming there is that, seriously, Of course, he was a lot under drugs, but that doesn't explain everything. It's also the way that he was looking at things. He was explaining that there is this idea of quantum mechanics worlds that are addition one to another. So it means that in this world, we are talking like that, you and me, Sofia, and maybe in the parallel world, we are eating in Hong Kong or whatsoever. And in another world, the pandemic doesn't exist. In another world, we are all dead for 10,000 years. And all this parallel world coexists for him. That's the way that he's thinking of these words to be working for our psyche. I think it's really important because he just said that sometimes you can have glimpses of how to reach one word to another one. So what I say, yes, there is a question of ethic in what you're talking about, in what you're saying. As educator, it is so important to create a safe environment to think, because thinking is metaphorically becoming naked. It's to try really to try to think is a very difficult exercise. So of course, ethic is there and fiction is part of it. And I don't mean that, for instance, Pevsner or Gideon were not ethical when they wrote what they wrote, but individually, we have to be extremely cautious, but it's a personal and individual way of dealing with that. So yes, there are limits, but as there are limits to everything. And on the other hand, it is the limits that you are doing when you are not having this pact of where everyone does agree to be part of an adventure. I think that would be the limit for me. Like when I use the image of the ventriloquism, which is exactly what I did with this kind of very bad recording. I'm sorry, because I just did it at home, but this piece, as Emma Figure was mentioning in the video, was telling me it's like a piece of ventriloquism, which is exactly that, because I was there, you could see me, I was not talking, and the film was just going on with my voice. So this kind of exercise also as educator is really part of what we're doing. We are ventriloquism, in the ventriloquist. And also what I mean is that design, objects, images in my case are my dummies. I'm using them to transmit, to convey, to try to seduce people with ideas. I mean, I may say that it's a time where ideas are very difficult to defend and very in a very cautious mode. And I use the term non-essential because I don't know what's happening in Portugal, but in France, when with the lockdown, we have our libraries and bookstores that are closed until tomorrow because they were said not to be essential. And that's what I mean also today. That's why I finished with the idea of a manifesto. I think that, yeah, reading is sexy. Thinking is sexy. And it's also a way to defeat capitalism. It's also a way to fight for design as a way of thinking, as a modernist, not a modernist, sorry, but as a modern way of dealing with contemporary issues. It's a way also to get free. And to set it free, I think fiction is an extremely important, is instrumental to the way we are dealing. That's kind of a love declaration for design that I'm doing with that.
So the third question, I'm using the time as much as I can. I'm squeezing the time to make the questions that your presentation aroses. But my third question goes a little bit, departs a little bit from your presentation. Recalling briefly the fictional proposal of Serge Brusselot, and I quote, "Words on the wind creates a work that is suspended in the air for a short time." You mentioned it during your presentation. I would like to introduce a question that somehow expands your presentation to other problematics. I realize that, but also emphasizes the relevance of understanding the meaning and uses of words, which I think was something that you underlined very well during your presentation. So I guess that you are in love with words and their meaning too. So how do you see the use of the term stories in social media, for instance? As we know, a story is a common model for publishing in social media based on a strategic ephemerality, another kind of recording the voice or suspending the words in the air for a short time, if you may. And we also know that this term is deeply ingrained. I'm sorry, it's deeply ingrained in our younger generations. So the question, do you think our idea of a story is being abused, stolen, kidnapped from our collective imaginary, or is it somehow being returned to us, being transformed so it can have a future?
If we can have a future, I don't know, I'm super pessimistic. But what I can say is that for me, the question is not so much, of course, this fact that everything is a story today. You do your TikTok story and your Insta story. And now even this terminology of the reels that I love so much, because it's such a pun. But if I really want to answer very quickly, I would say, for me, what matters is not that everything is story. It's that what is a story, but what is a good story. And I would answer very quickly to that. I know also that there is Lisa Timura, who happened to have me as a tutor for several years, so she knows what I'm going to talk about. Because theory, design, lots of things are under the umbrella of story and storytelling. That's so true what you just said. It is so true. I'm using most of the time to tell what is a good story, kind of dichotomic way of dealing with it. Which is either you go into pornography, either you go for erotism. So that's a strategy how to tell a story. One is that it's like the burlesque. So, I mean, you are not telling where you're going to go. You are keeping the suspense all the time, and you are letting your story get undressed slowly. The other way, until the result, I mean, I don't need to draw you a picture. Or you go for pornography. Don't be shocked. Again, it's not a question of ethic. Pornography is that right away you show pornography. And then you explain how you've come to that conclusion. It is two ways of telling story, which I find extremely unprovocative, to speak about that terminology, but very provocative in the way that you can deal with it. So the question is really, what is a good story? How do you tell a story? Is every story valued? Do stories are equals or not? And I think that's what you've been talking about before, I suppose. Of course not. Stories do, I mean, there's no two stories that are equal. And it's not because you use one process more than another one that it will matter in the terms of what makes the good story. So I think that's really the question, is that we are in the world of storytelling. And the question is, what is a good story? And what is a good story? Maybe not the story that sells the best. And also, why a good story? And sometimes maybe at the opposite of what I'm doing now, and maybe like the ventriloquist, sometimes we just need to be mute.
So good stories will always save us in the end. Maybe this is a possible mantra, to know the limits between a story of a social media communication and a good story based on storytelling. I was thinking if I can introduce something, a question from the audience, just to be the perfect moderator. Alexandra, do you mind if I pose one of
course
those
not.
questions? Let me say.
It's already so weird to speak to people you have no idea how they look like. You have no energy in front of you. I just had my cat going back and forth. That was my audience.
Victoria, which is a student from our bachelor, she says, I'm going to read it. Recently, reading Luísa Prado and Pedro Oliveira's beautifully written Breaking the Cycle of Macondo, Design and Decolonial Futures, I was presented to the previously spoken concept of fictions as a tool to reconstructing the way stories are told in previously colonized countries or the disruption of hegemonic points of view. How can we, as designers, in your opinion, prevent these fictions of turning again to a place of oppression and not liberation?
Thank you, Victoria. That's really, really very, very important question. First, because yes, it's true, fiction has been used as a tool of colonization. And that's why I tried to say very quickly with the story I've been talking about. But the great news about that, it is that right now I'm working really essentially on the question of the film, experimental film by designer, because it's a very, very affordable way of dealing with theory and spreading it. What I've seen, what I've noticed is that outside of the Western world, outside of the white male power, etc., or me being a scholar, that kind of things, outside of us as institution, there are lots of potent places where people are using very cheap smartphones and camera. Of course, they need to have that, but it's, at least you can find that in many, many countries you wouldn't think of to be connected to, in order to give people that they, I mean, not to give them, but that they take power in order to speak up and give their own version of what's happening. So I think already to have the possibility of recording and distributing very easily without the money you need even when you publish a book, which is not that easy, or when you do an exhibition, etc., is super important. Then to answer the second part of the question, which was how not to be manipulated at the end. I believe in a theory that was said like 15 years ago by Akimbe, that was called the TAS. And that said that you have this temporary zone of action. And of course, it's like in the Brusselot novel, these temporary are temporary. So what you can do is always to realize that it's not because utopia, political questions have been raised and did not succeed before that it doesn't worth to go back and back to that kind of questions again and to raise it and to do it your own way. It's going to be temporary probably, but that is super important because you cannot anticipate, because you don't have a crystal ball where you can predict what's going to happen. So what you can do is influence the present time. I'm absolutely against people like Rem Koolhaas, who used to say there is no alternative to capitalism and now so there's nothing to do. I think that we need to be in action. Believe me, I mean, it's most of the time when I'm teaching in design, it's not that often that I'm teaching to graphic design and visual communication, etc. And it's such a narrow world of producing object without raising questions that I wish people would come to the same kind of concern that you are just raising. It's very recent, but it's so important to deal with that. So you cannot expect to know what's going to happen in 10 or 20 years with what you're doing, but please do it.
Okay, so I think, well, you answered so fluently and eloquent as you always is, Alexandra, and somehow I feel that we are running out of time, and it was a very intense moment, this Q&A. So I think you can also be tired somehow. The questions are arising, as you might see it.
I'm not seeing it, but you know, if there are some really burning questions, please contact me.
Yes, I will.
Really do it.
I will do it.
Really,
Because
yeah, no problem with that, really. Do not hesitate.
This is also a way to, well, to compensate the good questions that arose during the Paulo Penas and your presentation. And since we were so short in time, we didn't have the time to put these questions into place. But I guess that we'll do it with Paulo, and if you don't mind, we will do it also with you.
Sure.
And now I guess I can conclude the session saying once again, thank you so much, Alexandra, for your wonderful presentation and for this moment of Q&A. Thank you also, of course, Paulo Pena, which did also a brilliant talk regarding post-truth and journalism. They were two truly inspiring lectures, I think. As mentioned by my colleague, Luisa, your words, Alexandra's and Paulo's words and ideas are now going to be received and interpreted by our bachelor and master students. So this doesn't finish here. It's part of the project, that the words gain other forms and other ideas also. So these outputs of our students, they are going to feed part of the publishing process of the daily news, the daily post-truth newspaper, which is exploring possible relations between reality, truth, post-truth, fiction, and of course, design. So we welcome everybody to stay tuned. Once again, I would like also to thank MAAT for this invitation. They were the trigger for all this thing to happen. And see you soon in one of the next stages of this project. And thank you all, the audience, our conferences, my colleagues, Luisa, Nicolas, and of course, MAAT. Thank you. See you soon.
See you soon. Thank you.